Okay, I know last episode I said it was penultimate, but I think this one really might be. Who knows? I really probably should get my life together. But this is these next two episodes really just they were amazing to get to do. My friends Richard and Brandon and I, we have had the privilege of doing this podcast now for these last couple of months, sitting down, having these conversations, and bring you guys in on that, so you could hear what we had to say as pastors, really figuring out how do we pastor with these difficult things we face. And so for these last two episodes, a couple of things changed. One, we got to have the privilege and honor of sitting down with the author of the book, Been Coming Through Some Hard Times, Jack Glazer himself. He actually called in, participated via Zoom, and so we were able to talk with him about the book, get his feedback, get his input as we conversed about things, and it just was really a wonderful time. We also, second thing is that we recorded these last two episodes in the museums of Hopkinsville, in the Penny Ryle Area Museum, and which was awesome because we were surrounded by artifacts that spoke to so much of the history that we have been talking about. The people who were there in our live studio audience, if you will, or our live museum, I guess, audience, they were able to go around and see the exhibits and just take part of the history. And members of the community came in as well. And so this is one of two episodes. This first one is us just finishing up talking about the book. And the next one is going to be our Q&A session, where we really conversed even more so with the community members who were present about the material, about the reality of what we're facing. So thank you, everybody who has just listened and supported, who have sent us your feedback and shared the podcast with others. Thank you again, Jack Glazer, for writing this book and allowing us to have this conversation. Thank you to Richard and Brandon for being so brave and bold as to sit down with me and to record these conversations and put it out there. Thank you to our families for putting up with us. And yeah, here we go. Here is the most likely penultimate recording of Been Pastoring Through Some Hard Times.
So now we are...
You tell me.
We're live.
Okay.
We're live. Actually live this time.
And I have failed to look up the exact number. I think this is 13. I have a strong feeling this is episode 13.
I thought we said we weren't going to talk about that anymore.
Oh, yeah, I did say that.
You broke your rule.
I do that sometimes. But we also do have a guest. So Brandon, Richard, myself, we are here. But we also have a guest. We have, I'm just going to call him Jack, but it is Dr. Professor, wonderful Mr. Jack Glazer. I can't see him through your head, Brandon. There we go. He is with us. And so thank you, sir, for coming with us.
Thank you, sir, for being here with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So, Jack, I mean, you've listened to some of the episodes. I will warn you a little bit that we are going to engage in our normal crazy conversation that we do. And feel free to jump in and yell at us if you need to. But
Not too loud, please.
But I want to jump straight back into chapter 6, okay? Yep. So chapter 6, where we left off, we rambled a little bit. That was a long episode.
That's not a little bit. That was a lot. That was an hour and 41 minutes of rambling.
It was productive rambling. It was good rambling. And one thing we didn't get to talk about is on page 200. It's in this part, it says, remembering Martin Luther King Jr. And the last sentence of that first paragraph says, the absence of monuments or other markers commemorating black life in the town only compounds feelings of estrangement when the symbols of the Confederacy are abundant.
Right.
So I wanted to point out, yes, the symbols are abundant, but we have made some progress. We've got a mural of Bell Hooks. We've got another mural somewhere, I think, of one of the Poston brothers. I'm not sure. And then I know there's a plaque somewhere, too, so it's definitely not enough.
A plaque somewhere.
Yeah, I think Farmer's Market is where I was told. Okay. I saw it. I don't remember where. My memory's not perfect.
But it's somewhere.
It is somewhere. It exists. It's real. But, I mean, we have something. But, Richard, you said something. You mentioned how that's not enough.
I don't think it's enough. I mean, if you go across the street, you'll go to the Historical Society, and we mentioned this on a previous episode, but you see Robert E. Lee everywhere. And there's nothing wrong with Robert E. Lee. He was a great military genius. I mean, he was one of the greatest military minds, as people say, in history of the U.S., but at the same time, he was on the losing side. And in case we forget, this is not a Confederate state. This was a Union state. And so why do we have all of these monuments, memories, visual reminders of the losing side? And so there's nothing wrong that we have them, but they should also have representation of the other side.
I mostly agree with you, mostly.
You mostly agree.
I take offense to saying there's nothing wrong with Robert E. Lee.
Well, I mean, as far as I'll look at him in the same light as I do Nathan Bedford Forrest. He was a military genius. I mean, everybody says that. Do I agree with what he believed in? Absolutely not. Do I think he was atrocious during the majority of his lives? Absolutely so. But as a believer in Christ, I also read where he gave his life to Jesus Christ closer to the end of his life. And so even though, and we mentioned this several times, or at least once, is that the people who enslaved and hated, they might be the ones to congratulate us on our place in heaven when we get there one day, because even though they did bad things, that doesn't mean that they didn't give their life to Christ. And so, I mean, it's hard to look forward to that, but at the same time, I'm not the judge of eternity for these folks. So I'm looking at the brighter side of things.
Yeah. Actually, so Jack, I'm interested. What would you say, like, about from your point of view? Which I just have to say, like, you corrected me when I was talking about the book itself, and you talk about social anthropology, how it actually works as a field, as a profession. What is your take on this of the sheer majority of monuments being for, as Richard said, the losing side, and there being such, even though there's so little for just celebrating the people of color who live here? What would you say about that from your point of view?
Well, the losing side was really militarily in the minority. If you look at all of the men who served in the Civil War from Kentucky, the majority were Union, were Federalists. And a book is brought to mind which helps to explain this. How does it happen that Kentucky, which never left the Union, which put most of its soldiers in the Union Army, not in the Confederacy, spent so many decades after the Civil War presenting itself as a Southern state? And there is a book, I think the title is The Making of a Confederate Kentucky. And you saw some of it in your earlier, in another podcast. Well, let me just leave it at that. Yeah.
No, that's a good point, because you're right. Like, I mean, we don't. If you had to say Kentucky was one thing, it would make more sense to call it a Union state rather than a Confederate state, especially in the contemporaries of the Civil War. But if they were to be transported to today, they would say, "Oh, this is a Confederate state."
That's right.
But it acted more like a Union state.
Yeah, and that's what we said at some. It's the most Southern Union state that exists, possibly, because there are certain, especially here in Christian County, they said that Christian County resembled like Lower Alabama or Mississippi in the way that its thought was, the way the concentration of slaves, the amount of slavery that had per capita, it looked like a Southern. I think Dr. Glazer, I think you said that in the book. It resembled a lower Confederate state than it does a Union state.
Hey, I'm going to call you out, Richard. You insist on calling her Miss Ellen, but you can call him Dr. Glazer.
Well, I call her Miss Ellen. I call her, Miss Wallace if I'm nasty.
Yes, that's be nasty. She's Miss Wallace.
Miss Wallace. I feel weird calling her Miss Wallace.
I just want to interject and say there is a really cool display back there with her diary.
Yes.
And so after the podcast, if you haven't seen that yet, that's a lot of fun. My daughter was telling me about that. Was one of her favorite parts of being here, was getting to read that after we had talked about it.
Yeah. Well, actually,
if I may say, since you brought up the diary again, I would like just to publicly acknowledge the person to whom we should be grateful for making us aware of that diary, the late James Killebrew, whom I've mentioned in the preface or somewhere in the preface or acknowledgments.
Yes, sir.
He was a local man, grew up on a farm, but also a kind of local historian. And he had a very good ability to ferret out these kinds of things that were in people's attics. So if you could imagine these little day books that were deteriorating one after another, I don't know how long it took him to do it, but the transcription is meticulous, absolutely meticulous. And it really is his gift to Hopkinsville and the people of Kentucky to help all of us understand this important history. So he was a great guy, and I'm glad to bring his name up.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
and that actually ties in with what I was going to ask you, Brandon, because here's an example of a man who he single-handedly helped us to have a piece of history that allows us to have a better memory today. What do you think about like the roles the individuals have as far as moving the story forward, of not allowing it to continue to be lopsided, but saying we're going to correct this inequality?
Yeah, so I appreciate that, Kamar. One of my concerns in doing this podcast is that it's very easy to kind of throw stones. You know, it's very easy to say somebody ought to, somebody ought to, somebody ought to. And then a question like that says, well, actually, Brandon, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Right.
If James Killebrew could do that, a very thankless task in many ways, and many would not remark on that, and yet it could potentially change the situation entirely.
Yeah.
Right? And so just thinking through that of the individual contribution doesn't have to be grand, right? You don't have to have $1 million in your pocket so that you can raise new monuments that really express the more broad range of Christian County's history. But you can make a difference by preserving history. Mm-hmm. You can make a difference by sharing that history and starting conversations with others who may not be aware of that history.
Yeah. No, that's good. I was telling Alyssa, who, for anybody listening and not here, she's the director here of the museums. I was telling her how I was speaking with the youth on Wednesday, and I said, hey, yeah, we're going to be at the museum. And a number of them said, we have a museum? I was like, yes, we have a museum here in town. Big building, you can't miss it. Because there's so many people who just don't know. And
Right.
sometimes it's just simply speaking about history, actually talking about it instead of pretending it doesn't exist. We'll do everything to change it.
Well, and I also think on that point that we have a tendency in this digital age to imagine that because we can access all this information, that we have access to all the information there is. And yet just the audience that's here with us right now has countless stories that they would have from their life, that they would have from their family history that will never be shared, never be known, and so that we get this digital blindness, thinking we know everything, but unless we're sharing, unless we're recording, unless we're preserving, we don't.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, that's good. So along the lines of recording and sharing and data stuff, I actually had another point I wanted to look at on page 203. Again, last sentence of the first paragraph. I guess that's my theme. Yeah. Last sentence of the first paragraph.
I have that too.
Under race and justice, and the justice it says, of the 73 officers on the force of a city with the second highest percentage of black people in Kentucky, only 5 minority officers were in service in 2005. And so I reached out and I was able to get updated stats. As of right now in Hopkinsville, our current police force is 68% white, 17% black, 13% Hispanic, 1% Asian, 1% mixed. And so I wanted to say, like, okay, that's a place, again, where we're seeing this shift, this change. It's a positive change.
Now, Kamar,
Yeah.
why do you think that happened? I mean, this is only 2005. So in 2005, it looks like there were 73 and there were 5. So it was less than 10%.
Yeah.
Why do you think that shift is taking place in, what is that, about 15, 18
So
years?
I wasn't here to see it, so I think some people here could probably answer it better than me. I can tell you what I've been told, and I admit that I've been told biased opinions by people who, from different parties who hold office within the city. And so their opinions they've told me have to do with, well, we think we got this person in administration, why it's done. I've heard the political answers. I wasn't here to live it out to see the real answer, but I have heard the political answers of, we got this chief who did this, and this chief who did that, and this mayor did this, and so those are the answers I've heard.
Right.
But I don't know personally, honestly.
And then the bigger question is, do you think it really matters? Has it really changed anything, or is it just the public perception that is different? Because you're able to tout that stat.
Well, there is the one thing that I wanted to talk about.
What's
that
that?
You both tried to tell me not to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
That a certain,
You're gonna poke the bear, aren't you?
a certain Mr.
There you go.
Dixon said you can't try that in a small town.
Yeah, you
But
can't do stuff like this in a small town.
but I said the song said to try it, so I mean that's what I'm gonna. But we did recently have that. We have a controversy that's currently playing out with the police force here in town of an officer. Let's be honest, it's a white police officer. He has done a number of social media videos that have had members of the community who are persons of color are really upset, saying that he seems very racist. This is what they're saying. They're saying he seems racist. He seems like he's out to get us.
Or did a racist thing.
And so you have a sector of the community that's really upset about it. And so despite this new diversity, we still have this division between community and the police officers, at times anyways, where they're doing things. And the community is like, well, what's being done about it?
So seemingly, because of events like that, it seems like things haven't really changed that much when things like that pop up. Is that's kind of the thought process?
I think that's how some people feel.
Yeah. So
that they look like me, but they're still not actually like me.
So let me ask you guys, what do you think?
Yeah. Brandon, you go first.
I don't like social media. And this is why.
Good answer. That's kind of like the answer you gave me when he asked me, what's my view on the end times? I said, I don't stand for any of those issues.
Yeah, I really am deeply skeptical about the value of social media. Yeah. It's a tool. It can be used, and it can be used for good, but there are too many opportunities for contextless controversy. Mm-hmm. And when you remove relationships, you remove context, you get all sorts of craziness happening. And you get this idea, too, that, hey, there's something valuable in just generating controversy.
Right. Yeah.
And so you get more clicks, you get more views, and anything that is built on the creation of controversy is contrary to, I think, the conversations we're trying to have, and it's contrary to the gospel that we would espouse as pastors.
But then what do you say, Brandon, to the people who claim that the good thing about social media is that people will act in a disinhibited format, or so to speak, so that they'll reveal who they really are because they feel like nobody's really seeing, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, people are prone to do things on social media they wouldn't do in person, revealing layers. We talked about onions a number of times today, revealing layers to their personality and the things they believe that otherwise would go unknown. What do you think about that?
I think it's okay for not everything to be known.
Oh, Brandon, I love you. Jack, as the social anthropologist in the room, social media wise, like, I mean, do you have a stance on that? Is Brandon right? Please say he's wrong.
I couldn't have put it better than Brandon did.
Man, I don't like you now. Man.
Very skeptical of social media. It doesn't have context, and you have license basically to do all kinds of dreadful things. The hate speech, the anti-ethnic feeling. It's absolutely dreadful, and I think we haven't yet fully coped with it, and we're still living. We will live with the consequences for a long time, and they're not good.
Yeah. Well, fine. Point to you, Brandon. Point to you.
I think that's point to Dr. Glazier.
No. It's Jack. Come on. He has to be called Jack. Man, what's wrong with you guys?
Point to Jack.
There you go.
What about Dr. J?
Okay.
He likes it.
That works.
Before I go into any more of my bookmark stuff, did you guys have something? Because, I always try and give you guys the chance to say something.
Yeah.
Oh,
please.
Yeah. Was it Heidi? Did she have something to say? No? Okay. Sorry. No. Go.
So my thought on the video and things, I think I agree with Brandon, but I also think that there's an opportunity to have a greater conversation if society, or if we were allowed to really have a thorough conversation. Mm-hmm. Because if the conversation was civil, we would react by saying, why are people so upset? Because I think there's I think from the original video and all of that, I think most people, when they view it, there's a lack of understanding why people get upset. They're upset because of where the video was shot, the history behind the video, the words of the video. I think there was, on both sides, I think that if they would have been able to come together and had a conversation, a public discourse, we would be able to go further than where we were. But because situations and sometimes sensibilities are so on the surface, we don't allow ourselves to go deeper than that. And that's one of the reasons why I think we engaged in this book and in the conversations that we have as a group of pastors, is because we wanted to get beyond the surface. We wanted to go deeper than just this is what I think, but no, why do we think a certain way? Why do people react in a certain way when something incendiary happens? Yeah. There's things beneath the surface, and if you don't know why a group of people think a certain way, then you're left in that state of just pointing fingers and being critical.
So they weren't able to make, I don't see any of them. You can see any of the guys here? No, none of them made it tonight because they're horrible friends.
They are not. They are not. They're great.
They all have things going on.
They
do.
Very important prior commitments.
But something
they're
that
kick you
I'm going
off.
to translate Kamar for you.
They're going to kick you off the pastoral island.
Hey, wait! When you guys translated for me earlier today, you got me in trouble twice. So no translating. But so one thing. So our one friend, Ron Hicks, he's a pastor here in town. He's of Native American descent. He's Cherokee. I like to say he's a card-carrying member of the Cherokee Nation because he actually has a card. But something he was teaching me last week after everybody else left, we were talking about derogatory ethnic terms, and he and I were going back and forth, and he was trying to explain to me how the term Indian when used to refer to Native Americans, is essentially the same as the N-word for them. And I was like, no, it can't be. And we were having our discussion back and forth about why I didn't agree with him, and we talked it through.
You were trying to tell him why it wasn't derogatory.
Exactly, because that's what I do. But what I like about it, going back to our group of pastors, what I like is that I left from there saying, okay, I now have a new understanding. I did not see it that way before.
Right.
I still struggle with seeing it that way, but I acknowledge that he knows it better than I do, and he says this is how it feels for him. And so I need to grow. I've actually been struggling with what I do with the name of my kid's school because they go to Indian Hills Elementary, and I've been like, man, now that I know that, what do I do with that knowledge? So I've just tucked it away, been like just letting it fester because I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
But it's something that I've grown on.
You've legitimized what he said was true.
You know, Brandon doesn't like it when you legitimize people's pain.
I love it. I mean, if he feels that kind of way about it, who are we to say that you shouldn't?
I'm learning.
Right?
I'm learning.
Tamar, perhaps next time you see this gentleman, you might ask him why we have something called the American Indian Movement, which I think formed up in Minnesota. And Minneapolis has large numbers of, dare I say, Indian residents. The AIM was a particularly radical movement. They were part of the takeover at Wounded Knee many years ago. And so...
did we lose data on him?
Indian people,
Oh,
they
there
would
we go.
say Indian is a venerable term.
The funny thing with this guy, Ron, too, I'll tell you, is that he uses the term himself. Like, he goes back and forth between Native American and Indian referring to himself. But he was helping me to understand. It's kind of like, it carried over to another conversation that I was having with my middle biological daughter. And just explaining to her about, like, so I prefer the term black. I prefer black.
Right.
Like, African American, I'll answer to that, but I don't like that term personally. But African American is the accepted general term you use to people of our descent if you don't know. And I was saying to her that he showed me that essentially it's the same thing with that term as well. Like with Ron, if I were to say to him, talk to him and talk about his Indian heritage, he wouldn't be offended in conversation because he even uses that term for himself, and we're in community together.
Right.
But he was helping me to realize that really Native American, this is the term to use when I don't know.
Exactly.
But it also is true that people will use that term, like you said, Jack. Like they'll use that as a term of endearment. They'll use that as a term of identity, as a term of strength. Again, we started the group of pastors who get together because we all need to learn more. Like, what is that thing you say a lot, Brandon? Like, we don't know, we don't know.
I don't think I say that.
You don't know that you say that.
But now I'll start saying it just to fulfill that, Kamara.
I appreciate you. See, yeah, I take back being upset about your point.
Another point you'll be interested in. When I was teaching a section on American ethnicity and race, students enjoyed it. I think they felt guilty. But I was listing a number of derogatory terms that were used for various American ethnic groups coming from Europe, Italians, Hungarians, Jews, and so on. And it was very heartening to realize that these kids, I mean, I did it over a number of years, but late 20th century, early 21st century kids didn't know them. I showed a cartoon from the New Yorker in 1936, which was virulently anti-Semitic. And I showed it to them and they said, I don't get it. And I said, this is really quite wonderful. Yeah. However, what has remarkable staying power and doesn't change are the epithets toward black people.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Slavery days to now. It hasn't changed.
Right.
That's right.
It's something that I continue to think about. It's just I think it ties into how there's this intertwining between white and blacks in America of that essentially they are almost, for lack of a better term, the two sides of the same coin. That white Americans and black Americans are uniquely American. Because outside of America, there's not this idea of white. It's you're German, you're British, you're French. Right. And outside of America, you're not black. You're from whatever country you're from in Africa. Like it is. I mean, and yes, there are darker skinned individuals from the diaspora around the world, but there's still something about the way it is here in America that there's being black and being white are uniquely American.
And I think part of that is, we refer to the original sin of the U.S. is slavery. I mean, it's the ramifications of that are interwoven to every aspect of our nation. So it's hard to, extract one from the other. It doesn't mean that we can't continue to move past and grow in all of that. But I mean, the fact that is our history is so woven into that, it's hard to separate it. Even to this day. I mean, he's talking about the epithets that are used back in the 30s for Jews or for different people groups. People don't know, but you still see epithets and racially motivated propaganda and advertising that is reminiscent of the early 1900s that still gets used today.
Yeah.
And
well,
it's
I
like,
mean,
have we grown past that? But you still see that.
So, Brandon, I know you're not social media savvy, although you're seeing it more now.
I am trying.
Okay.
I am making a good faith effort.
So either through social media or the
Yes.
news. 'Cause I know you follow the news
I
a
do
little bit.
follow the news,
Did you
yes.
see about what happened recently down in Florida with the neo-Nazis on the streets?
No,
Okay.
I'm not keeping up that well,
I saw it.
apparently.
Okay. You saw it, Richard. Hey, you
saw
tell people what happened.
Well, let me see. Which one was this now?
Because there were a couple different
Yeah.
ones actually in Florida
Okay.
recently.
Was it the protest? Oh, well, I was thinking of the one that, well, there's a couple of different things. The one that happened in Florida was the Nazis protesting what? Regard my memory again.
So they were recently out there and they were essentially protesting the idea of
On Disney, right? Is that where it was?
no, they were protesting the idea of white people.
Because it happened
not-
at Disney.
I don't-
That's the one I thought
it-
you were talking about.
I'll be honest with you. All I know for sure is that they were out there in uniform
Yeah.
with their swastikas,
Yeah.
like doing
Yeah.
their Nazi salutes,
Yeah.
and saying "You will not replace us" and things like that,
Yeah.
and shouting the N-word at people,
Right. And we have had this conversation, and it seems like there's an uptick in white supremacist activities.
Yeah.
We've seen in Kentucky, for example, that there's Klan activity panning in not in newspapers, but in mailboxes. They're handing out things. And
That also happened in
trying to
Florida too. They did that too. They also handed out like little packets that were anti-Jewish propaganda with pellets of something,
Right.
some unidentified thing in pellets, and it's like,
Right.
Yeah.
And then in Florida, the one that I saw was in Disney, right outside of Disney. There's neo-Nazis that are out there with their signs and their swastikas and their uniforms and things like that. And they're, freaking people out just trying to go to Disney.
Yeah.
But the idea is, we've kind of talked about this. In the year, I think it was 2040. I think it's 2040.
2040 hasn't happened yet.
No, I'm saying in the year 2040. I'm
Oh,
talking
okay.
about the future.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay, I thought you were talking about the past. Okay,
No,
sorry.
no.
Sorry.
In
Keep
the year
going.
2040, there won't be a racial majority. In the year 2040, and that is going to, I think, really set on fire those who are pro-white supremacy, that have this stronghold and belief that the white race is supposed to be dominant. And if you're in fear that there's going to be a time and place in the next so many years that they're going to be a minority, I think that's going to put a lot of fear in that white supremacist mentality. And so I think we're going to see, this is just me, but I think we're going to see more and more of those kind of incendiary events across the nation.
So Brandon, as the white guy in the middle,
Right.
how do you respond to that? How do you feel about being a minority, and how do you think other people like you should respond to being a minority?
Well, so I can't speak just as a white guy, as a white pastor. I know that the future of the church is not white, right? In large part, the center of gravity in the church world used to be Europe, shifted a little bit across the Atlantic, but it is no longer the case. The future of the church is Africa. The future of the church is South America, and I rejoice in that. I worship a Jewish carpenter.
Right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
There you go.
so I don't have a fear of becoming a minority because Jesus is not counting that way either. I guess it just shifts your perspective once you look at Jesus. You don't have, what are you worried about?
Okay.
If we are all children of God and we are all red, brown, yellow, black, and white, as the song now says, right? If that's the case, then we have nothing to fear as Christ followers, especially. And so, I don't know if that answers the question fully or not, but it doesn't scare me. It excites me, right? Revelation 7:9, a great multitude from every tribe, tongue, and nation. That's where we're headed. We might as well see it now.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, go ahead, Jack. Yeah.
Yeah, to the panel,
Yeah.
the three of you. To the bright side, I would say that, and I'm sure you'll agree, the people that the companies that advertise on CNN are not the thin edge of a left-wing socialist communist wedge. They advertise in ways that they think will sell the product. And if you see, it's now common to see mixed race couples, black man and white woman, blended families, two black men kissing each other at the end of a commercial. Have you seen that one? I mean, to me, this is fantastic and is reason for some optimism about tolerance and the fact that families in this country are changing. Many of them, blended, divorced, remarriage, adoption. And another book that I want to commend to you, I don't have enough strong words. James McBride, is he familiar to you? He wrote a book called The Color of Water. James McBride he's a well-known author. He's written several books after The Color of Water. He's an Oberlin graduate. And it is the story of his Jewish mother who grew up in a small town in Virginia, was very abused in her family. She left and she married a black minister. And then I think he passed away and she married another black minister. She had 12, I think at least about 12 gifted children. Christian McBride, does that ring a bell? He's a well-known musician. Who else? Jazz musician.
He sounds familiar, yeah.
James McBride writes about this experience of having a white mother and being raised in the church. And The Color of Water it's a wonderful title because once he asked his mother, because he's dealing with issues of race, white mother, black family, black people around. He asked his mother, "What color is God?" She said, "The color of water." It's a wonderful book.
Wow. Yeah. Kind of like Jack, I get excited about the possibilities as well, maybe from a different perspective, but I'm excited because we get to pastor through these times of change. It's like we entitled this old series called, Been Pastoring Through Some Hard Times.
Which, thank you, Jack, for not suing us.
Yeah, please. Thank you. But the idea is that, I don't think there's a greater time to be a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ than on the rise of hate, on the rise of so many people that are going to need an answer for hope, for so many people that are going to need reconciliation. I think as agents and ministers of reconciliation, it really puts us on the forefront, or it should put us on the forefront, to be ministers of the gospel of Jesus Christ, to say Jesus is the only way that the human heart is going to change. And I think as we see hate increase, as we see division increase, we're going into a political season next year. There's going to be a lot of rhetoric. There's going to be a lot of, you did this and that I hate that side. But as ministers of the gospel, as ministers of reconciliation, we should be on the forefront of like, you know what, you think like that and you think like that, but there is one who can bring peace to every side.
So I got a question for you again, Brandon, because I like giving you questions. Because you answer so well.
I don't.
So I mean,
it's like that.
I felt like that was a backhanded compliment.
No, right? You speak so well.
Yeah.
You do. You speak so well for your people. There you go.
Thank you, Kamar.
So you guys know I've been reading more James Baldwin lately. I've actually just been rereading through The Fire Next Time because I haven't read it in a couple of decades, and I've been doing notes like I wish I had understood what this said when I read it in my teens, because my life would have been easier. But James Baldwin right now, he's in this part of this essay where he's talking about when he became disillusioned with the church. Because he had his career as a minister, as a preacher, as it were, and he becomes disillusioned with the idea of Christianity. But something that he says before he gets quite completely disillusioned that I thought was interesting, and I want your take on, is that he said that we were speaking of black people in Harlem, especially black church folk in Harlem, is that we were very, very clear in understanding that if we were the descendants of Ham, white people were the descendants of Cain. What do you do with that? Think about that. I mean, like you said, Richard, we're in this time where we get to pastor through this time of bringing together unity, yes, but there's still a number of people of color, or even white people who just have also been hurt and abused, who say, you know what, I'm not buying this unity mess you guys are selling because I've seen what you've done. I've seen how you acted. Like what do you say to that?
So for me, I would go to E. Stanley Jones, who was a missionary in India And I'm pretty sure, just as Jack, you've been gracious to point out some of the mistakes that we've made, Wynn, I'm sure you can give us feedback on that as well. But I've mistakenly called him an Anglican from England when he was actually like a Methodist from America. So I got close anyways. But E. Stanley Jones was a missionary to India, and this is in the time of the Indian nationalist movement. And he was constantly trying to be pigeonholed, if you will, on the subjects, right? Should Britain release her hold? Should the Indian Nationalist Party take the reins, et cetera, et cetera? And basically, he said, we have to shift our way of thinking on that. And what he said was, because people were trying to take the Old Testament and say, this is how you make this work for this argument, or this is how you make this work for this argument. And he says, you're missing the point of the Bible. The point of the Bible is Jesus. And so to the person who says the Christian church has not produced unity, has not produced that, I would agree and say you're right. In many ways we haven't, but it's always when we take our eyes off of Jesus and we get distracted by other things going on in the text. Jesus told the Pharisees, you search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life, and it is these that point to me. And so for me as a pastor, that's where I go. And so if you're going to quote, a biblical passage to justify, imperialism and colonization, then I'm going to have to say, yeah, but look at Jesus.
Yeah.
Right. And that has to be the square that we talk about. And that's where I think we see that unity come, is a focus on him.
See, you do answer well. Before we close, because we're getting close to the end of this episode, I want to shift gears a little bit. Well, what you got a picture?
Yeah, we've ignored the Bible, not the Bible. We've ignored the book. Sorry, I'm looking at Richard's picture here.
Yeah, a picture of Jesus Saves. Please tell me those. It looks like Klansmen robes.
That's what they are.
Oh my goodness,
that's what that is.
Richard, you're the. See, this is why I don't ask you questions, Richard.
That's why I lost my train of thought.
I agree. Jesus is the answer. And all of you guys cannot see this, but this is a picture of, I don't know, about 50, 60 Klansmen at some sort of a rally. And in the background across the top of the stage, it says, Jesus saves. And so I believe that Jesus is the answer, but so did they. So I think it requires greater depth in conversation and sometimes confrontation to be able to move the ball forward. And we've mentioned this before, but I love Frederick Douglass. He said, without struggle, there can be no progress. Without struggle, there can be no progress. And I think Jesus is the answer, but I think we're going to have to fight for this unity that we desire. And some of it is, it's not just going to come just because we preach messages. There's got to be action that's taken. Like one of the things, and we'll talk about this maybe in a little bit more in the Q&A, but as a group of pastors, now it's about 8 or 9 or 10 of us from about 8 or 9 different churches, we went against, I think, just went against the normal flow of things, and we decided to meet together. And the premise of why we started to meet is, let's talk about the multi-ethnic church in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and as members of different leaders from different denominations, from different ethnicities, let's talk about how we can do our part, and it starts by us growing organically together. Yeah. And so I believe Jesus is the answer wholeheartedly, but it also is going to take us to break some molds of what we've been used to get to that point.
Yeah, well, and to the point, I mean, because, and you can verify this too, Brandon, we have had difficult conversations in those mornings. We have had times when people have been confronted and had to. I remember early on we went through that whole period of just getting all of our white friends to say black loudly
because they wanted to whisper.
Because every time they said black, they whispered it. So I mean, we've made progress. You guys say black confidently now. That was a period.
But I'm just glad we're not shouting it anymore, because that was just kind of awkward for everybody.
That was the only way to break the habit.
We had to break through. It's like exposure therapy.
Yeah. But, all right, so back to the book just for a second before we close this out. 206. This is something that I want to talk about, especially because you had a shirt on this morning, Richard, that said, I am a Hopkinsville legacy.
That's right.
Right? And that shirt, I know I have one of those at home too, because it speaks to a thing that no longer exists. And so here towards the bottom third of the page, it says, the processes of urban deterioration do not happen according to impersonal, inexorable laws. They occur through collaborative and mutually reinforcing decisions to direct public and private resources away from the central core. So if I haven't made enough people mad already with me, I'm just going to go ahead and say this. we no longer have the legacy, which for anybody who doesn't know, that used to be Inner City Res. They rebranded, changed the name. And I am very biased because I was on the board. So yes, I'm very biased. But we no longer have this organization that exists. And the whole point of the organization was we are going to channel funds and resources to try and better downtown. We have certain areas, certain neighborhoods that are suffering more than others, and we are going to try and do something about it. Plenty of people will say, well, nothing was done over all the years. Okay, maybe they didn't accomplish a lot, but at least there were people there who were trying. At least there was an organization with money, and they were trying to do something. And now that is gone. When he says that, like I'm reading that and him saying, it's these laws, it's these legislative procedures, it's these policies that intentionally destroy. A number of people in those neighborhoods feel like, yes, and that's what's going on again right now. They are intentionally choosing to neglect and destroy our neighborhoods. I know that's not what they say. I know I have friends on both sides politically. I have friends who'd be like, Kamar, how dare you say that? But it's my opinion. I'm allowed to say that. It's wrong. This is being done again. We can talk about progress being made, but in many ways, I also see us moving backwards. Hoptown is moving backwards because downtown's not going to get better if we don't do something about it.
Just to point out, just a minute, I think if you look at all of Hopkinsville is just the municipality, I think we've misjudged all of Hopkinsville. I think if you look at it just from the government side of it, you can think that way. But I think also, if you look at, and I think the church still needs to be the answer because the church possesses the answer. I think a church that is unified, I think a church that has its eyes wide open can be the answer that this community needs. And I think part of the solution is having conversations, but then it's like, what are we going to do? And hopefully one of the questions that we'll have in the Q&A is, what are we going to do after this? How does the ball, if government fails, there's that old saying that if you hear a knock on the door and they say, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, then we've all lost. It's got to be more than just the government coming through with a pocketbook and a checkbook. It's got to be the citizens. It's got to be, to me, I think it's got to be the church that stands up and says, you know what? We have abdicated our role as leaders in the community for too long. What are we going to do about the problems in our community?
Well, yeah, but us as pastors, so I want you, come on, don't just stay in the middle of this, Brandon. Like, jump in the middle of it.
I'm at the tennis match.
I know,
just side to side, man.
But so this is where I get upset as a pastor because the politicians, the people who are making these decisions, oftentimes attend churches. And they're allowed to comfortably be a part of these churches.
Comfortably?
And their pastors aren't making them uncomfortable with what they're doing to the world. Like, that's something that really just bugs me is that, like, no way should you be able to treat people this way and feel okay about it and call yourself a Christian and be a member of a church. It
sounds like we need to befriend their pastors then.
I mean, I don't know. Brandon, are you their pastors?
I think that...
Why are you going to throw him under the bus like that?
Yeah. No, I was going to say...
Because I actually know he's not the pastor of these people. That's right.
Right, but even so, I was going to say, do we give people the opportunity to grow? And I think that a lot of times we don't. And so myself, I have learned a ton reading this book. Thank you again, Jack. Greatly appreciate it. And I've learned a lot in our conversations on Friday mornings. I've learned a lot from just hanging out with you guys and talking. And I think I've grown over the last 6 months. I'm not the same person that I was before. And I don't know that we extend grace enough to those pastors who aren't confronting those issues when we should be extending grace and having those conversations. I think that's...
Did I get a point?
Yeah, well, point to Richard. So I do.
I'll be
I think
pointless today.
10 points for Kamar, just so he doesn't feel bad. But I do. I think that we start from a position of grace giving and saying, all right, let's start the conversations. Now down the road, and when there's rejection, when there's those kind of things, maybe a different story. But I just think in large part the conversation hasn't even been tried. It's just been like, well, you guys are terrible, so...
What is that Lewis quote about, it's not that... Or is it Chesterton?
Chesterton, right.
Yeah,
it's not that the Christian life has been tried and found wanting. It's been tried and found difficult and thus neglected. I can't remember.
Something to that effect, yeah. Well, before we close this out, I do, Jack, I would love it if you could just weigh in on any of these things or something else that you want to say about just, this chapter 6 is really about how things changed, but they didn't change enough. There was progress being made, but it didn't go as far as it should have. Sitting where you sit, what are your thoughts now? Do you stand by that? Do you think that, no, I was too nice or I wasn't nice enough? Like, where are you at?
You're asking me.
Yeah. We want to close on your thoughts.
Well, I don't want to comment on whether you're nice or not nice. No, I want to make what I think is one of the most important points of the book, and I'd like to claim originality. But if I do, I'd be misrepresenting. It's been a point that's been made by a number of historians, and that has to do with the monuments and historical memory. Mm-hmm. They're emphasizing the sons of Confederate veterans, the daughters, the people that put up the Jefferson Davis obelisk, mm-hmm. The monuments all over the state, all over the South, about which there is now so much contention. What they emphasize is the devotion and the valor of soldiers who left home with great sacrifice to fight for what they believed. This is what those monuments are celebrating. And others have said, historians of great note, and what I would sign on to, is that the problem with that point of view of emphasizing valor and self-sacrifice in the spirit of a cause, which they see as ennobling, the problem is that perspective does not consider the causes or the consequences of the Civil War. The causes were slavery. There's no doubt about it. The consequences were the effort, and it was easily done, of reconciliation between North and South. The gatherings of veterans, the encampments, they're applauding each other and feeling wonderful and so on. But the cost of that reconciliation of North and South was the deprivation of civil rights, the deprivation of the promises of the new Constitution that came after the Civil War. And there was a collaboration of North and South to ignore those constitutional guarantees in the name of reconciliation and reunification. That's right. And I think that's what we need to bear in mind.
Yeah, that's
causes
good.
And consequences. And as to the causes, the book does talk about the question of whether it's slavery or, that's a big debate. It wasn't slavery, it was states' rights. Well, we know from history, obviously, that after the election of Lincoln, something like 6 states, maybe 7, seceded from the Union. Right. And they were eager to get the rest of what became the Confederacy to sign on. And what they did was to some of the states dispatched what were called secession commissioners to go to the states that hadn't seceded, to speak to their legislatures, to urge them to secede. And the emphasis on the argument again and again and again is slavery. Slavery is our way of life. Yeah. This must be protected. This must be guarded with your secession and the creation of a new nation.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you for that, and thank you everybody who's been here. We're going to take. I'm going to end this particular episode, and we're going to take a break. So, Jack, if you need to go to the restroom or get some water or something like that, we're going to take about a 5-minute, 10-minute break between this one and the next episode recording. But I do want to just say again, thank you for writing the book. Thank you for allowing us to talk about this.
I didn't allow you to talk about it. It's still a free country.
It's been very important. Like Brandon said, it has changed us. It has informed us. It has actually truly made us better pastors. Because being 3 men who pastor here but not from here, it has helped us to better understand the community God has called us to. So again, thank you for the work. And that's going to be the end of this episode. And you want to say anything funny or crazy as we leave?
No.
Okay, cool.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any institution, organization, or corporation. The material and information presented here are for general information purposes only. All persons who participated did so of their own free will and speak for themselves only, regardless of any personal affiliations they may possess. Been Pastoring Through Some Hard Times is a production of Salt.Light.Love Ministries, all rights reserved.